The FBI is now involved in the Nolan Wells investigation, but there is an important question that needs to be answered before anyone assumes what that involvement means. Has the FBI actually taken over the investigation into Nolan's death, or is it assisting local authorities while pursuing a separate federal matter? That distinction matters because the investigation has reached a point where the questions surrounding Nolan's death are no longer limited to what happened on Horn Island. There are questions about the autopsy, digital evidence, witness accounts, and the growing number of threats directed at people connected to the case. And now, federal resources are involved. But not in exactly the way some headlines and social media posts have suggested. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office remains the lead agency investigating Nolan Wells' death. The FBI has confirmed that it has assisted with parts of the investigation, including the use of federal tools and partnerships, and that agents have helped with digital evidence. The FBI has also been investigating interstate threats connected to people involved in the case. Those are parallel efforts, not a federal takeover of the death investigation. That distinction is easy to miss. And with so much attention surrounding Nolan's death, it is important that we get it right. Because at the center of all of this is an 18-year-old young man whose family still does not have a public explanation for how he died. Nolan Xavier Wells was from Ocean Springs, Mississippi. He was a college football player with plans for his future. On July 4, 2026, he traveled with friends to Horn Island for the holiday. The trip ended without him. The boat carrying Nolan and his friends eventually left the island without Nolan aboard. His friends told investigators that Nolan had chosen to remain behind after meeting a young woman and intended to return to the mainland another way. Nolan's family has questioned that account, particularly because his phone and keys were not with him when the others returned. The timeline became even more troubling when Nolan could not be located. His body was found in the water near Horn Island on July 6th. At first, authorities did not publicly identify evidence of a crime. Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter said investigators did not initially suspect foul play, while emphasizing that the investigation remained active and that authorities were working to determine exactly what happened. That initial position became one of the most important points of disagreement between investigators and Nolan's family. The Wells family wanted a more complete examination, so they commissioned an independent autopsy. The findings from that examination did not provide the answer they were hoping for. Instead, they created more questions. Dr. Roger Mitchell Jr., a former chief medical examiner in Washington, D.C., conducted the independent autopsy. The preliminary report released in July listed both the cause and manner of death as undetermined pending investigation. Mitchell also said he could not rule out the possibility that non-accidental factors contributed to or caused Nolan's death. That does not mean the independent autopsy proved homicide. It did not. It means the examination could not establish a definitive cause and manner of death, and could not exclude the possibility of outside factors. That difference is extremely important. The autopsy also contained a detail that immediately attracted attention: an area of red discoloration in the deep tissue at the back of Nolan's head. According to reporting on the preliminary independent examination, the area measured roughly 8 to 12 inches and was considered inconclusive, requiring further investigation. The examination did not find fractures or other deep tissue injuries. So what does the discoloration mean? Right now, there is no confirmed answer. It does not automatically establish that Nolan was struck. It does not automatically establish that someone attacked him. And it does not automatically establish that he died before entering the water. The pathologist's conclusion was limited by the condition of the body and by the fact that a state examination had already been performed. That limitation is one of the most important parts of this story. Nolan's body had been in the water for days before the independent examination. Decomposition had already occurred, and portions of the neck structures had been retained during the state's examination, which meant the independent pathologist could not fully evaluate certain questions involving the neck and airway. There was another limitation. The independent examination could not fully establish whether Nolan had inhaled water. That matters because, if investigators are trying to determine whether drowning caused his death, evidence involving the lungs and airway can be important. But those questions cannot simply be answered from the independent autopsy alone. And that brings us to the state autopsy. The Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office completed its official autopsy by the end of July, but the results have not been made public. Officials have said the report will be provided to a grand jury after the investigation is complete. For Nolan's family, that means one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire case remains out of public view. We know an official autopsy was completed. We do not know the full conclusions of that report. We do not know whether the state's findings agree with the independent examination, and we do not know what the grand jury will ultimately be shown. That is why the FBI's involvement has attracted so much attention. Because investigators are not looking at only one piece of evidence. They are dealing with a much larger picture. The FBI has assisted Jackson County investigators with digital evidence, according to Sheriff John Ledbetter. That is significant because the digital trail surrounding Nolan's final hours may include information that cannot be reconstructed simply by interviewing witnesses. Nolan's family has also taken legal steps to obtain digital records. Court records show that subpoenas were issued to major technology and social media companies, including TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Life360. The requests seek records that could help establish communications, photographs, videos, and location information connected to Nolan. Think about the value of that information. A witness can remember an afternoon differently weeks later. A photograph has a timestamp. A location record can place a phone somewhere. A message can show what someone knew at a particular moment. A video can potentially establish who was present. None of those pieces automatically solves a death investigation. But when investigators compare them, they can test whether different accounts fit the same timeline. And that is where the FBI's technical resources could matter. Still, we have to be careful with the phrase, "the FBI has stepped in." The FBI itself has said Jackson County remains in charge of the death investigation. The agency has described its role as supporting local investigators when federal resources can expand their ability to gather information and find answers. Separately, federal agents have been investigating interstate threats made against people connected to the case. Those threats have become a serious issue of their own. People connected to Nolan's case have reported harassment and threats as the story spread across social media. At least several people have faced criminal charges related to alleged threats against individuals or government offices connected to the investigation. That means the FBI's involvement does not necessarily signal that federal agents have determined Nolan was murdered. It means there are federal issues connected to the broader case, while local investigators continue examining Nolan's death. And there is another reason the timing matters. The public conversation has become enormous. Nolan's family has called for answers. Civil rights organizations have pushed for transparency. The NOC joined the family's legal effort in August, while the Congressional Black Caucus has called for federal involvement. But public pressure and investigative evidence are not the same thing. A grand jury will eventually have to consider the evidence gathered by investigators. And until the official autopsy findings are made public, until the digital evidence is fully examined, and until investigators finish working through the witness accounts, there are still important pieces missing. One of the biggest questions remains the simplest. What happened to Nolan during the period after he was last confirmed alive and before his body was found? The independent autopsy has not answered that question. The FBI's involvement has not answered it. Social media has not answered it. And neither has the public speculation surrounding the case. What we have instead is a growing investigation, an official autopsy that has been completed but remains unreleased, an independent autopsy that could not determine the cause or manner of death, digital evidence being examined, and a family continuing to demand a clearer explanation. And now, the next question is whether those pieces can finally be brought together. Because the most important development may not be a dramatic announcement from the FBI. It may be what investigators discover when they compare the autopsy findings with the digital record, the GPS data, the videos, and the accounts of the people who were there. That is where this investigation could begin, to move from unanswered questions toward evidence-based answers.